Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Alrighty, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today. This is part 10 of the 12-part webinar series on the 90-day business sprints, which is hosted by Chris Snyder, the CEO and president of the Exit Planning Institute, as well as the awarded Thought Leader of the Year. A few housekeeping notes before I turn it over to Chris today. My name is Drew English. I'm the program coordinator here at the Exit Planning Institute. I will be recording this webinar and it will be sent out after the session, so just look for an email from me with the downloadable link to listen to this recording. And then also, if you have any questions during the presentation, there's a chat box in the drop-down menu of GoToWebinar. We encourage questions, so go ahead and type a question in there, and I'll moderate those over to Chris, make sure those get answered for you. So if you have any questions, go ahead and type those in. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Chris for today's business sprint. So Chris, it's all yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Drew. And welcome, everybody. We have 385, last I heard, registered. I very much appreciate that. That number's been growing every month, and sure like to see that number over 400 next month. So stick with us. We are on number 9 webinar this year of our 12 webinar series, and we've been covering each of the 11 actions to rapidly grow your business and unlock wealth. Today we're going to talk about measurements, metrics, and rescoring. It's not a subject that I've spoken too often. It's probably, for those of you that have heard me speak before, probably some new information for you. I'm going to take you through the metrics process, and towards the end of the webinar, I'm going to actually show you a process that I take, that my organizations go through, and then also I take my owner friends who own their companies, take them through the same type of a process to help them get their metrics established. So let's start out with the purpose of metrics. The first purpose is really to create what I call personal and financial business harmony around the 3 legs, which is where we started at the beginning of the year, right? We want to make sure that our personal, financial, and business are aligned, and that we're working on things not just related to our business, but from a personal and financial standpoint, that those objectives be in harmony. And actually, that's a new word that I'm using. I used to use the word balanced, but I was meeting with a Vistage chair, and she was talking to me about the way she views personal, financial, and business. She used the word harmony, because when we talk about balance, it almost sounds as if we're offsetting one thing against the other. But in reality, as a business owner, as those of you that are owners know, business is personal. There's really no between business and personal when you're the owner, and having both all 3 of our personal, financial, and business objectives in harmony, so they're all working together, is actually, I think, a better way to think about it. So when we go to set metrics, we want to make sure that we have metrics aligned in all 3 areas of the 3 legs of the stool. Second, we want to accelerate growth in business. If you recall, we talked that business value should be your number 1 goal, because that, focusing on value produces all other positive outcomes, as we'll explore. And to be, your overall number 1 metric ought to be, what's the value of my business? Create a focus on where we as a company, or you as the owner, want to dominate the market. So we can't, in this, I spoke about this in my book a little bit, in today's market, you really have to sort of decide which side of the fence you're on. Are you going to be a specialty type provider where you're really good at a couple of things, or are you going to try to be a mass marketer? But most middle market businesses can't mass market because they're just not large enough. It's almost impossible for you to, for example, compete with a Home Depot, because you just don't have the leverage that Home Depot has. But what you can do to compete with these bigger players is specialize and figure areas where you can dominate is really where our metrics should be measuring how well we're accomplishing that. And third and fourth, actually, is to integrate the efforts of the team. The old 1 + 1 = 3 scenario. By working as a unit, we actually, and using that leverage, we actually exponentially grow the performance of our teams. You've heard the saying, right? The sum of the parts don't equal the whole. So we really want to make sure that all our metrics throughout our organization are integrated and everyone is rowing the boat, so to speak, in the same direction. Sorry about that. Ultimately, what it comes down to, what we teach in SEPA is answering the question, what does success mean to you? I know that sounds like an overly simplified question, but really, that's what it comes down to. How do you define success? How do you define success personally, from a personal financial standpoint, from a business standpoint? And, often one of the stories I share is a family that I was with, a son and his father. And his father was glowingly speaking about his son, one of his nieces, cousin of his son, about how successful she was in business and how much money she had and how big her house was and what kind of a car she drove. And I could see that it was starting to really bother the son as the father, talked about his niece this way. And finally, the son blurted out, he says, well, I'm successful too. I don't have the money she has, but my wife and I have given you 3 grandchildren. I dedicated my life to the family business, which has done well. And you could tell that from the father's standpoint, he was his center. He was defining success as money and things, where the son was really more focused on the family unit, and the success of being a father. So it's really, all of us have different success criteria. We have different centers, but finding those centers and defining what it means to be successful on whatever you choose to be the priority is ultimately what we're trying to figure out. Now, the 3 success areas that we teach at SEPA is really based on these 3 legs: personal, financial, and business, right? We want to make sure that we have goals and objectives and metrics in all 3 areas, and that, as I talked about, that those 3 areas are in harmony, that they're in alignment, and they're working together. And so we have to define success from several viewpoints. We also have to define success as it relates to our value systems, and oftentimes these value systems are in conflict, right? You, as the owner of the business, you're oftentimes also the father or the mother or the uncle or the aunt or the grandfather or mother. So you're the father, for example, you're the owner of the business. Oftentimes too, as the owner, you're the best manager in the business. You know the business better than anybody. You've probably been around longer than anybody else. And so oftentimes as the owner, these systems, these value systems are in conflict. And one of the stories that I share in my book is the father that I had lunch with that had to go back to the office that afternoon and fire his son. And it tore him up emotionally to have to do that as the father. But as the owner of the business and as the CEO of the business, he knew that was something he had to do. But it doesn't make it any easier. So when we're defining our success areas and we're building metrics around those success areas, we have to do it in the context of making sure that our 3 legs are harmonized and that we're also looking at these things from several different viewpoints in relation to the important relationships we have. As I talk around the country, and I'm getting a lot of positive feedback about this as well, directly from the business owners, is this concept of focusing on value first. Most of owners have lifestyle businesses. I'd say 90% of the businesses out there are lifestyle businesses versus what I would call value creator businesses. Lifestyle businesses are owner dependent, and they rarely can get transitioned, which is why one of the big reasons we have such poor transition rates. But they do generate nice income. And we went through a couple of months ago, we went through the story of CWR that was generating around 2.5 million in income, and 33 million in gross sales, and yet that business had no value. By focusing on value first, right, we can have both value and income. And it's not that income isn't important, it clearly is. We can achieve income and value if we focus on value first, because the very things that we would do to create a more valuable business will drive more sales and income. And we did cover that a couple of months ago. I do want to remind you, as kind of teeing up, establishing metrics, then we want metrics really based around value growth. That's really where our metrics should be built. And it's really based on this concept that of understanding the math of valuation, right? There are two sides to the equation. You have the cash and the sales on the left side. You have the multiple there on the right side. And the thing that really drives value, where I usually say the game is played and won, is really on focusing on the multiple. And the reason is that most business owners will have 80% plus of their net worth locked or trapped in their business. And 80% of that is going to be directly tied to what I call the 4 C's, or your intangible capitals. Most of us, specifically lifestyle business owners, focus on the left side of the equation. They focus on growing sales and generating more income. And the owner is in control of that. Where we're missing the boat, and why I call it one of the greatest unaddressed issues in the business community today, is we're really not focusing on managing the multiple. For every dollar of income that you bring in, you put $1 in your pocket, or certainly at least before tax. But for every dollar you bring in, you perhaps can be generating $5, $6, $7, or even $8 of value. Now that's not something you can put in your pocket today, but it is real wealth. And but we can only get to that wealth if at some point we're able to harvest it through a transition process. By focusing on the multiple, you will drive the left side of the equation as well as the right side of the equation, and you get this exponential effect. And I'll show you an example of that coming up. We've also talked about using the 5 stages of value maturity: identify, protect, build, harvest, and manage, to manage your value growth process. And that process should really focus on the 4 C's, human capital, structural capital, customer capital, and social capital. This is where 80% of your business value lies. And remember, 80% of your wealth is in that business. So that's where we really want to focus our metrics. That's where we want to focus our team's attention. That's where we want to focus our actions, because that's where we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck. Most recently, I went back and looked at Microsoft, who I've been using as an example, public company to use as an example of the importance of focusing on intangible assets. When I wrote my book, Microsoft was valued at around 290 billion. And just recently, I went back to look at it through the suggestion, actually, of one of the attendees at my webinars. And Microsoft most recently had a market valuation of $5.2 billion. It's incredible growth. When you look at Microsoft's balance sheet, their net assets are only $72 billion. The difference, that $500 billion difference, is intangible assets. It's goodwill. It's 87% of Microsoft's value. And it's no different when you look at a private company. If you were to look at their balance sheet, that balance sheet is not going to reflect the true market value of that business, or most likely will not. It's going to reflect the written down asset value of that business for tax purposes. And the same goes for the income statement, right? The income statement is going to reflect the written down income for tax purposes, because our strategy is to pay as little as possible on taxes. There are two numbers in every business, the real number and the tax number. And unfortunately, most owners don't get any kind of regular feedback on what their real number is, which is that adjusted number, normalized number, that really is a true measure of the cash flow benefit that would flow to the present or future owner. And valuation is really based on the real number, not the tax number. So value acceleration, the system I created, was really built around managing the real number of your business, focusing on the 4 C's. Last month, we reviewed value acceleration, which we defined as a proven processes that focus on value growth while aligning business, personal, and financial goals. Two of the bullet points that we talked about that directly align with the establishment of metrics is one of the benefits of value acceleration. It provides the owner key deliverables and metrics. So it's not only a system that helps you align and organize the actions that are going to drive value, but it's also a system that if you go back and review every 90 days where you stand, it'll also be a system that drives accountability and measures the value gain that you're creating by implementing the actions in those 90-day sprints that we talked about. And this action, because you're not only driving more sales and income, but you're also driving the multiple, gives you this leap in value. And that is one of the primary purposes of value acceleration. If you recall, that process starts with what we call the triggering event. It's a personal, financial, and business assessment correlated to a business valuation. The key outputs, some of the key outputs of the triggering event is it identifies your profit gap and your value gap. And it not only identifies what your business is worth today, but maybe more importantly, what your potential value is of that business if you were to implement these actions that would improve your scores and therefore raise you in the range of value. And so to me, that is just powerful information for the owner to have so that they can decide how aggressive they want to be in pursuing increases in value, or in the examples I've provided, in some cases, the owner is satisfied with the value they have and they choose to exit the business because mitigating is more important than trying to go after that increase in value. My point on that is that that's the owner's decision. And unless you do a triggering event, you don't have the information you need to make an intelligent decision about what you want to do with your future. And so the process, the 5 stages of value maturity, always start with identify value. Identify value is always first, and it should never be skipped. It is the baseline. It sets the baseline and the ultimate metric, which is business value. This is done in that first step of the value acceleration that we talked about last month. And it's going to be done through this interview process where you assess the owner's personal, financial, and business attractiveness and readiness, and then you correlate that to the value of the business, and you place the business in that range of value that we talked about on the last few months. What you get out of the triggering event are 2 scores, and these scores will form the basis for our metrics going forward. You get an attractiveness score, which really measures how attractive is your business from the outside in, from a buyer's point of view or future owner's point of view. You're going to look at this, these value factors, there's 25 of them, in 4 different categories: business factors, forecast, market, and investor considerations. And you're going to be able to come up with an overall score as to how attractive your business is to an outsider. But if you recall, we talked about attractiveness and readiness are not the same thing, right? Attractiveness is how the business looks from the outside. Readiness is how the business is, how prepared the business is and the owner is to transition that asset or convert that asset, or what I like to say is harvest the wealth of that asset. You can have an attractive business, that is not ready to transition. And that means that just because it's attractive, it doesn't mean that it has any value. It only has value if it's both attractive and ready. And the example we gave a couple of months ago with CWR was a really good example of that. A $33 million business with $2.5 million of EBITDA, good solid growth. But when we look deeper under the hood, we found all kinds of issues like customer concentration and owner dependence and lack of written strategies and lack of structural capital. And these would be things that would prevent the owner from ultimately converting the asset or extracting the value out of the business. And so we need to be both attractive and ready. The point here is that once you go through that first stage, you're going to identify all of the things that you can do to potentially achieve or close that value gap and close that profit gap. Closing the profit gap means we're going to put more money in your pocket right now. And closing the value gap means we're going to create significant wealth for you. Oftentimes, it's 400 to 500% of what your current wealth is, because we're going to position the asset, the business, to be able to harvest it at some point in the future. So this becomes the basis. If you think about it, this becomes the basis for your metrics going forward. This is done in that second step of the discovery phase in the value acceleration methodology. So coming out of the triggering event, the first step, we're going to identify all of these things where we're strong and we're weak or neutral. And then we can begin to align our organization around and develop action plans around making improvements that would allow us then to raise the value of the business. So that's why I say that's the ultimate value. And those actions will change every 90 days potentially. They could change every 90 days depending on what you're emphasizing and where you want to focus going forward. Doing these things then in 90-day sprints in the second gate of the methodology, the prepare gate, produces and creates a culture of relentless execution. And the relentless execution really is built around 4 bullets. First, having a vision, an articulated vision, a detailed vision of what you want to accomplish. And that's going to be based on that simple question. What does success mean to you, right? And your vision is going to be built around those success criteria. Then we want to align our resources, our organization, and our financial resources around achieving that vision. And we're going to do that in the prioritized action step, where we build these plans around achieving this vision. We're going to move into the prepare gate, and we're going to address accountability, because we're going to move into these 90-day sprints where every 90 days we're recalibrating and resetting, we're measuring, and we're as we continue to go through these 90-day sprints, 90 days at a time, we eventually develop a rhythm within the company and a culture that's focused on value growth and relentless execution. This starts with really the strategic planning process, which is fairly simple. I take my clients through a 2 to 3 hour process where we define this. I usually will start, if you remember, I designed a number of workshops, business envisioning, personal envisioning, and then something called 6 Weeks to Better Business, where we align the owner's personal financial business, and then we align the organization around achieving those success criteria. It starts with identifying opportunities and threats, defining your core values, figuring out what 2 areas of the market you want to dominate, establishing targets, or really targets are the expected future results, the capabilities that we need or the skill sets that we need to achieve those results, and then getting into the details and defining the milestones that are going to demonstrate that we're on track. This is done in this process of 6 Weeks to Better Business, which we've talked about before. It starts with a value growth education, right? Educating your management teams on the principles behind value growth, the principles behind value acceleration. defining our strategic direction over the next 3 to 5 years. And as I've mentioned before, I actually like to go out 10 years with vision statements. I think it takes 10 years to actually implement a vision. But then breaking those 3 to 5 year strategic objectives into what we're going to do next year and in the next 90 days, and then organizing and aligning our organization to those 90-day and 1-year initiatives. That's all done here in those first 4 workshops. Each workshop should be 2 or 3 hours and involve your key management as they go through this process together. In our focus groups, our owner roundtable series focus groups, what we're doing with them is each one of those peer group members starts out with an attractiveness and readiness assessment and evaluation. And then coming out of that, we define our themes, and then we begin to develop these plans. And each month, they come in for a couple of hours of education and peer group discussion where we discuss one of these workshops, and then they leave with the objective to complete their strategic plans or priorities, or set their priorities, and then they come back the following month and share their discovery and their plans with their peers, get some feedback from their peers, and then we move on through the next month. Integrated action plans, as I said, start with vision. Coming out of your vision, what you're going to want to do is develop some themes. From those themes, you'll develop some projects. Those projects will result in tasks. Those tasks will produce milestones, and ultimately will produce the deliverable that you're looking for. The vision should be 3 to 10 years. Your theme should be 90 days to a year. Your project should be 90 days. Your tasks are going to be less than 90 days. Your milestones will be about 30 days. And ultimately, these things will, if you organize it this way, will ultimately drive and increase the probability of you being able to produce the outcome that you want, or the deliverable that you're trying to produce. Now, the reason that I bring all of this up is because when we're setting metrics, we can't really set great metrics, or certainly not integrated and targeted metrics, if we haven't gone through this first step in our vision, and the actions that we have to take to achieve value growth aren't clear, not just in the owner's mind, but they need to be clear throughout the organization. So as you go through this process, one of the tools that you could use is what I call my business planning pyramid. It really starts with the customer, and then it moves more functionally through marketing and sales, through fulfillment, through the beginning support, frontline support, organizations, facilities, technology, people, maybe supply chain partners, vendors would be included in that, ultimately leading to finance and legal, and then the business enterprise itself. As you go through that process, and each of your functional groups are setting their metrics, we want to make sure that these metrics are aligned towards achieving the ultimate purpose, which is the vision of the company. The other way that you could set themes coming out of triggering event is maybe around the 4 C's, human, customer, structural, and social. That would be another good way to establish your theme. So you come out of the attractiveness and readiness, and you find that you are going to probably have some weaknesses in all 4 areas. You might decide that over the next 90 days, let's focus on human capital. Let's make that our theme, and let's develop action plans around improving human capital. Then, a couple of periods of that, or a period of that, 2 or 3 periods out, maybe our focus becomes customer, right? As you begin to improve your human capabilities, your customer relationships, your structural, which remember is your financial statements, your processes, your systems, all the back end stuff that really allow you to repeat your successes, and train people on how you want them to operate so they can operate independently, will also eventually improve your social or your culture, which is ultimately, the strongest. I mean, when you have a strong culture of relentless execution, it's likely that you've accomplished significant progress on the other 3. We're also going to use this priority process to select our projects, starting early in our implementation, our value acceleration process. starting with de-risking. Remember, we want to protect before we build. So we're going to start with de-risking type activities, taking risk out of the business, taking risk out of our personal financial situation, taking risks out of our personal situation. These things, these types of activities take the least amount of time, effort, and money, and they do produce an increase in value, although it's a limited increase in value. It's kind of like the foundation for growth. And that's why I have protect as a stage before we build. Eventually, as you move beyond mitigating risk, you're going to move into more strategic type actions. You're probably going to take on or want to consider taking on efficiency type actions, things built more around making your relationships with your customers more efficient, making your relationships with your people more efficient, making your processes and systems and manufacturing processes more efficient before moving on to growth. And the reason for that is we want to build a scalable system. We need a scalable system if we're going to build a sustainable growth model for the business going forward. Ultimately, as I work through owners with this, I present it linear, but in most cases you're going to have actions in multiple circles here, but you really shouldn't start a more advanced stage until you've done something in the previous stage. So in other words, you shouldn't really be focusing on strategy until you've mitigated risk. You really don't know what efficiency actions you need until you've figured out what your strategic direction is. Ultimately, culture produces the most value gain, but it takes the most time, effort, and dollars. So we've covered a lot of that in previous webinars, and that sort of has led us up over these 9 months to metrics. So now let's say that we are in a position where our vision is clear, our strategic direction is clear, our priorities over the next year and the next 90 days are clear, and we've aligned our teams around these themes and these action plans. So now we're ready to go, right? And the next thing to do would be to develop a series of metrics that would allow us to measure our progress. Now there's two types of metrics. There's results-based metrics, and then there's leading indicators. And the tendency for an organization is to really focus on the results, and not as much on the leading indicators. The 4 C's, for example, are leading indicators. This is why I say you can have both value and income if you focus on value first. Leading indicators lead to improved results. And so it's just as important, maybe even more important, to focus on leading indicators, things that are going to drive performance, that are going to produce results, than the results themselves. The results tend to take care of themselves. That's why in general, my theme about exit planning is that we don't want to focus on the end. We don't want to focus on the decide gate. Exit planning really begins way much further in the beginning, in the discovery phase. We are making decisions every day that affect our exit. And I say throw out the idea of exit and just focus on building a strong business. And if you do that, you're going to have a number of options, right? So exit planning really is present tense. And that's really the paradigm shift that we're trying to create in the mind of the owner and in the mind of advisors throughout the industry. So our metrics, our results metrics, should focus both on current and future, right? So we want to know where we are today. That's what we do in triggering event. And then we want to set some targets out in our strategic planning process to where we want to go. Remember, we're doing this personal, financial, and business. So not just for the business, but also personally, where do we want to go? How much wealth do we want to create? How are we going to create that wealth? So we want to have current results-based metrics, and we want to have future results-based metrics. Next, we want leading indicators, because basically, if you think about it, in terms of a flow, we've got our current situation. We need to know what are the leading indicators that are going to drive the future performance. This should be driven by the 1 or 2 areas of your market and in your life where you want to dominate. Targets, which are set at 3 to 5 years, are set at 1 year and 90 days, should be really defined around what do you think you can achieve, right? And what will be the result, future result, if you achieve these and implement these action items. And we want to make sure, again, that it's balanced personal, financial, business. Basically, what we're saying to ourselves is if we do, act, or behave this way, we can expect to see this result. What is that, right? And this really starts with the owner and the family at the center, and looking at your success criteria, your personal, financial, and business success criteria, and making that very clear and aligned, and then eventually pushing those objectives out throughout your key teams. And you'll likely have different teams, and we'll be talking more about teams next month. Your business initiatives will probably have different teams involved than would be your personal and financial initiatives. Remember, in the Prepare Gate, we've got two concurrent paths going on. We've got personal and financial activity, which are driving personal wealth, and then we've got business activities that are driving business wealth. And these activities will be concurrent, although they may involve and will likely involve different team members. So we want to make sure that we get our act together first as owners so that we can clearly articulate what success means to the team, and then we can get our teams working on that. Just as a reminder, what I suggest the business owners do, and a lot of them sort of have an aha moment when we talk about it, is run your personal and financial the same way you would run your business. So one of the things that I talk about in Walking to Destiny is that you use this strategic framework process that was created by Verne Harnish in Rockefeller Habits to go through the process of articulating 3 to 5 year, right? So you're going to go through opportunities and threats. You're going to go through core values. You're going to define 2 areas you want to document. You're going to set your targets. You're going to define the capabilities that you need to develop to achieve those targets. Then you're going to define your milestones. Now that's pretty straightforward. It's intuitive from a business standpoint that we would do that. But the thing that might be a little bit of an aha moment is do the same thing for your personal. Use the same worksheet. That's what I recommend my clients do. If you think about it from a personal and financial standpoint, it's no different. You've got to look at what are your personal financial opportunities and threats. What are your personal core values? That's really going to define your centers. What are 2 areas in your life that you want to dominate? What are the 2 most important areas of your life, right? What kind of future results are you looking for? What capabilities do you need to develop personally? For example, maybe you need a written 3rd act plan for what you're going to do next. Or maybe you need to bring in a personal financial planner to help you develop a 3 to 5 year wealth creation plan. And then ultimately, what are the milestones that are going to demonstrate you're on track, not just from a business standpoint, from a personal. So take the same principles that you use and you've learned so well from a business to run your business, and run your personal life like it was your business, and run it the same way. And I'm sure that you're going to see the same kind of results you get from your business. The key is that we get into this rhythm of these 90-day sprints, which is this continual loop of prioritizing, executing, measuring, and reconnecting and recalibrating every 90 days. So that's why I say, depending on what your themes are, right? Your themes are going to drive your projects. Your projects are going to drive your tasks, drive your milestones. And then we want to develop a set of metrics around what we're trying to accomplish in the next 90 days. Now, you will have metrics out 3 to 5 years, but really the way things get done is they get done 90 days at a time, right? Somebody said to me, how do you eat an elephant, right? So you take a bite at a time. So the way we tackle these big projects is we really try to articulate, we take these big efforts, these plans and objectives, and we break them down into what am I going to do in the next 90 days. And those themes may shift depending on what happened in the market, what happened in your personal life, or where your business is focused right now. And what we're going to do is we're going to develop measurements around what those priorities are. Now, here's an example of why you should, if you're going through these sprints every 90 days, why you should go back to the attractiveness and readiness and rescore yourself. That's why I keep saying that's the ultimate measure, because what we're measuring is value growth. And if we're growing the value of the business, it's because we're doing things in human, customer, structural, and social capital. We're improving the 4 C's. And that's driving, because I have better talent, I have deeper relationships with my customers, or I've developed a dominating product or service in the marketplace. I've developed processes that can be repeated and that have a high degree of quality that match my brand. And I've developed a culture that buys into that whole process and is a high performing culture. I'm going to be producing more income. So what we want to do is go back to check ourselves and rescore ourselves using the attractiveness and readiness. It's only a 3-hour process on the initial interview. And really, to go back, once you have your numbers, to go back and rescore yourself is not that much effort. It's an hour, a couple hours every 90 days. And as you raise that score, so as you improve those action items, so as you move from a 3 to a 4 or a 4 to a 5, your score is going up. And because you've determined your range of value in the triggering event, you can actually measure the value gain that's been created in the business. So here's an example. Let's say in this particular market, the range of value, the multiple range of multiples in this market for this business are on a low end 3 and on the high end 9, and the midpoint is 6. Those multiples can be correlated to your scores on the attractiveness and readiness. So for example, if you scored 58%, which is a midpoint score on the attractiveness and readiness assessment, I'd probably give your business a multiple of 6. If you scored below 50%, I'm probably giving you a multiple of 3 or less. If you scored 72% or above on the attractiveness readiness, I'm probably going to assign you a multiple of 9 because you're operating best in class in your industry. So let's say we have a business that scored 83 out of 151. 151 is the number of value factors that I use when I evaluate a business. I look at 151 different value factors is what they're called. And let's say this business scored 83 overall, which would give them a score of 55%. That's the red triangle that you see there. So 55%, I'd probably place them somewhere between 4.5 and 6 multiple, which is, in this case, let's say it's about 5.25, 5.25 multiple on the business. If they just improve their scores by just 10 points, so we move from 83 to 93, I now have raised my score to 62%, the green triangle there. And now that means at 62%, I've moved above the midpoint. I'm somewhere between the midpoint and the medium to high point, which means I'm somewhere between 6 and 7.5 multiple. So let's assign that, let's go halfway and we'll assign that a 6.75 multiple. Now remember, that's just moving your score only 10 points. If the EBITDA of this business was $2.5 million at 5.25 multiple, it would be worth about 13. If we move the multiple alone without moving EBITDA, right? We move from 5.25 to 6.75. We raise the value of the business to $16.875 million. That's an increase of $3.7 million or 20. And if we actually not only move the multiple, but also move EBITDA by say 500,000, a 20% increase in EBITDA, our value rises to 20.2 million, which is over 7 million increase in value, or more than 50% increase in value. And that's just from moving the multiple from 5.25 to 6.75, and meaning we raised our score from 55 to 62. So all you have to do is, as you begin to implement these action items in your 90-day sprints, is go back to your attractiveness and readiness, right? Look at that value factor and decide whether or not you want to move it up. And if you're able to move that just 10 points, you have significantly improved the value of your business. And now you can measure and you can see the value of your business growing. Now, the other point I want to make here is that if I have raised my score from 55% to 62%, I've not only raised my multiple, but I'll bet you that you're likely going to be raising your cash and your sales as well. meaning your EBITDA is going to move as well. I don't know if it would move 20%, but it's going to move up. If you don't see a correlation between raising your score and raising your EBITDA, then I would question whether or not you're focusing on things, right? Or it could be that it's going to take a little bit of time for those things to actually pay off, but they should pay off. The point here is that by focusing on both the left side and the right side of the equation, you get this exponential increase in value, and your ultimate metric is going to be really going back and measuring your value gain. Now, here's a little workshop I'm going to take. It's a 2 or 3 hour workshop. We've only got about 10 minutes here. But what I've offered is, if you go to my website, SnyderValueIndex.com, I've actually put a set of instructions on how to go through and establish one-page dashboards within your company for each of your key managers. And you can go to my website and download that, what I'm going to show you here in the next 10 minutes. You can download that, and you can run one of these workshops in your own company. When we set metrics for our clients and in my own businesses, we really are looking at 4 areas. One is daily and weekly measures. We're looking for really getting it down into the daily and the weekly things that we can measure that are going to drive performance, guide our priorities, help us maybe anticipate problems and opportunities and get out ahead of this stuff. And the ultimate question that I ask the management teams when I'm working with them is, how do you know you had a good week? I mean, we all know if we had a good week or not, right? We leave on Friday, or some of us Saturday morning, and we know if we've had a good week. Well, what determined that? And it's really trying to get yourself to articulate what defines a good week for you. Everyone in your organization should have measures, or at least certainly at the team level, they should have 1 or 2 daily, weekly measures that align with the vision and the direction of the company. We want to start not just looking at the past, but remember, we want to start predicting forward. Because if we have a business where we can predict the outcomes, we've got control of our business. And I always say that an owner doesn't know their numbers, doesn't know their business. And to give you an idea, I was with actually my son this morning. We were looking at some things from EPI, and we went back to our process last year where we had come up with our assumptions, and we had predicted what our results were being. And the reason we went back to that is we wanted to understand, are the assumptions we're making in our planning process, are they accurate or not? And if they aren't accurate, why not? And I'm happy to say, and so is he, that as we've owned EPI longer and longer, our ability to predict outcomes for EPI have gotten better and better. And then last is visibility. You want to make sure that these metrics are visible, whether you're hanging boards, or I know at EPI in our sales floor, we do post-it notes on the windows, and things move around on the windows. Regardless of what your visibility system is, you want to make sure that those metrics are visible. And every employee should have some kind of a whiteboard or something in their office that is a visual reminder of what they should be focused on and how well they're achieving that. Now, to set metrics, the first step is to really identify the key information that's relevant to success, right? We want to define our success areas, define 2 or 3 critical success factors for each success area, determine the source of your data, and then 3, set targets or goals for each success factor. Your success areas, they're going to be different depending on what level you are in the company. So for example, if you're the president, you might define your success criteria around departments of the company. As the owner of the company, you might define your success criteria around personal, financial, and business. Balanced scorecard, which is a system that I've used in the past, suggests you define success areas in 4 areas: customers, financial, process or operations, and learning and growth. Not much different. All of those are part of the 4 C's. In value management, I like to use the 4 C's: human, customer, structural, and social. Customers matches up with balanced scorecard. Financial would be as part of structural. Learning and growth would be part of social, and process would be part of structural as well. And I really like a heavy emphasis on human capital, because I think, as I've found in just talking to owners, probably more so than anything else that determines the outcome is the talent within the company. You might also organize around the 5 stages. You might also organize success criteria around, like I said, the 3 legs. Now, this would be something that if I was taking an organization through this, I'd have them conduct and try to define their success areas right there in the workshop. The next step is to define 2 or 3 critical success factors for each success area. And it might be something like sales calls per day or per week, invoices processed per day, average invoices per employee, volume of dollars processed, number of loads covered. I don't know what those are in your company, but once you have your success criteria defined, the next thing you want to do is, what are the critical success factors to allow me to achieve that success area? Next, you want to determine, so that you can measure this, you want to determine your source of your data. So where's your data going to come from? You know, if we have a metric, we need to get access to the information so that we can monitor our results. And the 4th step would be to set 3 targets or goals for each success factor. And what you're going to want to do is you want to set a minimum goal, a satisfactory goal, and an outstanding goal. The minimum is the borderline between satisfactory and unacceptable, right? It's the minimum achievement level for us to feel good that we've achieved the goal. Satisfactory is the next level up, and outstanding would be something that's achievable but still very challenging. In most cases is achieved over a long period of time. So we're going to probably meet several minimum and several satisfactory before we ultimately can get to the outstanding level. Outstanding goals are usually achieved through a series of satisfactory steps, in other words. Once we have that defined, the next thing is to provide regular feedback on the performance itself. So each month, you want to report the status, the trend, and the actions. So in this case, I have success areas production, and one of our critical success factors is % machine efficiency. So I would say, I might set, for example, a minimum goal of 85, an outstanding of 98, a satisfactory of 92. And then what I want to do is I want to report out each month where I am, what's my status. In this case, you can see that this particular company has not achieved the minimum yet. So they've got a ways to go. It's not just hard numbers though, too, as you get into action items. So a big part of our process is implementing actions every 90 days. You could set milestone achievement of your projects as well as hard numbers. So I might have a project that says I want to implement improvement of whatever project, you know, phase 1. And I might say the minimum is to have that implemented by May 30th, satisfactory would be May 15th, and outstanding would be to have that completed by April 1st. And your status in this particular case might be it's still in the planning stage because you haven't started the implementation yet. Once we've got that, the main thing you want to look for in reporting are trends. So for example, here's that machine efficiency graph. What we want to do is over time, we want to look at how we're improving or if we're improving. The main thing is, although you might not achieve the goal, you want to make sure you're heading in the right direction. So a lot of what I do in my company and a lot of my clients is what we really want to know is what's the trend. Okay, so you're working at improving it, and it's still okay, or it might still be okay if you're working to improvement. So if you look at this particular graph, you can see that performance has been acceptable only in the last 2 weeks. Although a satisfactory level is not being achieved, the trend is in the right direction, and this trend is what status is what we would put into our 1-page management report. So it'd be taking it to the next level. In addition to reporting the actual status, you want to also report the trend, because again, if you haven't achieved the objective, you still want to make sure the trend. And even if you have achieved the objective, if the results are going down, that's a sign that there's potentially some trouble on the way. So in your monthly reporting, you want to report both positive and negative results, but we don't have to report everything. We don't have to talk about it. What we really want to be talking about are those items, on a positive standpoint, those items where we're exceeding the satisfactory goal. And negative results are those where we're not achieving the minimum goal. That's where we want to put our focus. In addition, you want to report the number of periods in a row and present the trend. So even though I might not be achieving it, if my trend is good, that still might be okay. And then anything above the range really deserves special recognition. That's where you want to focus, and you want to focus your rewards. And anything below the range means it needs attention. There's potential problem, especially if it's not trending in the right way. All right. Here are a couple of examples of the visuals that some of my clients have worked on. Here was a company where their theme was baseball, obviously. And on the left, what you see is a graphic that we created in the workshop that has their 5 action items on it, what they wanted to work on. But we just sort of drew out what this visual would look like. And each action is represented by one of the bases on the baseball field. But in addition to this, we have suggestion cards. If you look at the top of the drawing, we had our purpose documented, what our values were, what our proof statement or vision statement was, what our BHAG was, and our mission, because we wanted people to see this. And this board was posted at the front door of the office so that when you walked in, there was no way you couldn't pass it. And people would, walk in and right away they'd be able to see their results. Here's another example of a dashboard that I have used personally, and I've used a number of clients. It's a little bit more extensive. It's difficult to put it together in the first time you do it, but once you do, it's pretty easy to maintain. And if you look at it, basically you have my success areas and my goals down the left side. You have how I'm going to measure what are my critical success factors in each one of those success areas. You have my minimum, satisfactory, and outstanding goal defined. You have the status being reported, you have the trend being reported, and then you have a series of actions or comments that I would update every month as I reported out my results. And I would take this one-page report in to, in this case, it was Andy Rayburn at Flexalloy, and we'd sit down and kind of talk about the results. And most importantly, we'd look at the trends, and we would look at the action steps that I'm taking to either get things on track or keep things on track. Another important aspect is down at the bottom, you can see what our major initiatives were. These tied back to my one-year initiatives, which tied into the company's initiatives. The projects that we had completed so far this year, the hot projects that we were working on, these would be my 5 action for that 90-day period, the status of each one of those projects, and who was responsible for them within my department. And again, you can see how valuable this one-page dashboard would be. And each month I would sit down and go through the results, fill this out, and then discuss this with my team and with Andy Rayburn, the president of the company. And this is a final example of what I call a pulse report that many of my clients do. It shows the financial results of the company on the left side, upper left side there. It shows our actual results year to date compared to our budget and compared to last year. We have, the color codes going, so right away there's recognition as things are good or bad. So we're having a pretty good year. And then down below that for the month, we have some key operating statistics monitoring. We had some income statistics we were monitoring, and we had some balance sheet statistics that we were monitoring. And then on the second page, which was on the back of this one-page document, we had that prediction that I talked about. We had that forward look where we would do every month, we'd do a forward flash is what we call it. And we would our sales forecast going forward, and we would identify what our white space was, what we needed to fill, what we felt like we had to, sales we had to close in order to fill the white space, and also an income forecast going forward. So these are just a few examples of once you've gone through that process, and to put it in some form of visual that you could post on the board, or at least have it on a piece of paper that you could sit down and review with your staff. So your homework this particular month would be to step back and evaluate your current metrics and dashboards, and really look at these metrics and dashboards and ask yourself, are you really measuring value gain? Can you measure value gain? Are your metrics and dashboards, are they integrated? Are they focused on measuring the value growth within your business? So as your folks accomplish their objectives, can you tie this back to a specific value factor that you discovered at the triggering event, so that you can measure and rescore and watch your value climb and your income climb. Next month, we're going to be covering team play involving key parties. Our webinar will be on November 22nd, which is a Wednesday from 1 to 2 o'clock. We've got 2 more webinars to complete the year, and I hope you'll join me again. Thank you, and back over to you, Drew.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. There were a couple questions that came in through just regarding if this was being recorded. Yes, it was being recorded. I will be sending out the recording as well as the previous recordings to you later today. So just look for an email from me later today with those recordings. But if there's any other questions that we can answer, please feel free to reach out, let myself and or Chris know. We get those questions answered for you. But with that, we can go ahead.
Also say, just a reminder, Drew, that there is a document that's available on Snyder Value Index. If you go to Snyder Value Index, we've loaded the instruction one-page management reports there. So you can go there and it's a free download.
Perfect. So please take advantage of that as well. We will go ahead and conclude today, get everyone back to their busy day and busy week here. But like Chris said, we'll see you next month, November 22nd. Any questions, let me know. And everyone else, have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.